Welcome to the channel. Today, I want to tell you about the blood-stained Nile River story according to the story in the Bible. Please follow the channel to hear more good stories. The story of the Nile turning to blood, the first miracle. Time and setting. It was a scorching morning in ancient Egypt. Around 3,000 years ago, the sun had already risen high and cast a blinding light over the land. The heat of the summer was intense, and the air was thick with dryness. The bright sunlight shimmered off the stone roads, creating an almost surreal glow. The air felt oppressive, and each step on the hot earth was like walking through a furnace. Along the banks of the Nile, tall date palms bent gently in the warm breeze, but even the slightest gust of wind couldn't relieve the suffocating heat. The bustling streets of the city were filled with activity. People moved hurriedly from one place to another, while carts pulled by oxen transported goods. Farmers worked diligently on their land, relying on the Nile to irrigate their crops. The river was the lifeblood of Egypt, a source of food, water, and prosperity. Little did they know, however, that a great and terrible miracle was about to unfold. In the royal palace, the air was thick with tension. Pharaoh, the powerful but obstinate ruler of Egypt, sat on his golden throne, his eyes sharp and calculating. His court officials, scribes, and magicians were gathered around him, discussing the affairs of the state. But his mind kept drifting back to the two strange visitors who had come to him with a bold request. Moses and Aaron, two Israelites, had come to demand the release of the Israelite people from slavery. Moses and Aaron received God's command. Outside the palace, Moses and Aaron stood in a quiet tent, a sense of heavy responsibility weighing on them. Moses felt the weight of God's command pressing down on his shoulders. He had long been reluctant to accept this task, but now, with Aaron by his side, he knew it was a calling he could not refuse. Aaron, while more confident in his role as spokesperson, also carried the burden of the moment. Despite his words, there was a subtle unease in his eyes. God had commanded Moses and Aaron to go before Pharaoh and demand the freedom of the Israelites. But God also warned them that Pharaoh's heart would be hard and that he would not easily agree to their request. However, God assured them that his power would be made known through miraculous signs. The first of these signs would be the turning of the Nile into blood. The meeting with Pharaoh. On the day Moses and Aaron arrived at Pharaoh's palace, the atmosphere inside was charged with an unmistakable tension. Pharaoh sat on his throne, wearing a majestic golden crown and flowing royal robes. His posture was regal and confident, his gaze piercing as he looked down upon the two men before him. His eyes narrowed in quiet scrutiny as Moses and Aaron stood, unflinching. Before him, Aaron stepped forward first. He held his staff firmly in his hand, his eyes meeting Pharaoh's with unyielding resolve. Though his hands were steady, there was a flicker of apprehension in his gaze. "Pharaoh, king of Egypt, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast for me in the wilderness." Pharaoh's lips curled into a cynical smile, and he tilted his head slightly, sizing up Aaron and Moses. He was unimpressed. "Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice and let Israel go?" Pharaoh asked coldly, his voice dripping with disdain. "I do not know this Lord, and I will not let Israel go." His eyes lingered on Moses for a moment, as if weighing him, before returning to Aaron. The king's expression was one of utter superiority. "You have no power here. You will remain as slaves, like all the others." Moses lowered his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of Pharaoh's rejection. But then he looked up again, resolute, though Pharaoh's words stung. Moses could feel the presence of God strengthening him. He knew this was just the beginning of what was to come. The first miracle, the Nile turns to blood. Aaron stepped to the edge of the Nile, his staff held high, and he spoke no words, only following the command of God. The heat of the sun blazed down upon the river, casting a golden glow on the water's surface. Then, in a single motion, Aaron brought the staff down upon the waters. The moment it touched the river, the water began to change, slowly at first, then rapidly turning a deep, unsettling red. Within seconds, the entire Nile River had turned to blood. The water that had once been a source of life, a vital part of Egypt's survival, had become thick and foul, a river of death. The entire river, along with all its tributaries, wells, and reservoirs, was affected. The fish died and floated to the surface, their bodies bloated and lifeless. The stench of decay filled the air, choking those who dared approach. The people of Egypt were horrified, unable to drink from the river or use the water for any purpose. Pharaoh, sitting in his palace, was unmoved by the sight of this devastation. His eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched, but he gave no outward sign of fear or concern. The blood-red water was shocking, yes, but Pharaoh's pride was far stronger than his shock. He remained unmoved, even as the entire land of Egypt seemed to tremble under the weight of the miracle. Pharaoh and the sorcerers of Egypt. The court of Pharaoh was in turmoil. The people were frantic. The magicians and sorcerers hurriedly called to Pharaoh for an explanation. Some of Pharaoh's advisors and magicians, eager to demonstrate their own power, attempted to replicate the miracle. With quick incantations and hand gestures, they caused some water sources to turn red as well. But the more they tried, the worse things became. The water continued to flow with blood, and all their efforts did was make the situation even more dire. Pharaoh, watching this spectacle, remained cold and silent. His expression was one of disbelief but not of humility. These men have done nothing to undo the destruction, Pharaoh muttered under his breath, still not willing to acknowledge the power behind the miracle. His heart was hard, unwilling to bend, unwilling to change. The sorcerers could do no more than add to the disaster. The once life-giving Nile had become a river of death, and no amount of human magic could reverse the curse. But Pharaoh remained defiant, his will unmoved by the devastation around him. The consequences of Pharaoh's hard heart. Despite the evidence before him, Pharaoh's heart remained as stone. He dismissed Moses and Aaron, ordering them to leave his presence. "I will not listen," Pharaoh declared, his voice firm and unwavering. "You will not be granted what you ask for." Moses and Aaron left the palace, their hearts heavy. They knew Pharaoh's refusal was not the end but the beginning of what was to come. For 7 days, the Nile remained blood-red, the people of Egypt suffering, their once thriving land thrown into chaos. Moses and Aaron knew that Pharaoh's defiance would only bring more suffering, more plagues upon the land, but they also knew that God's plan was unfolding, and that his power would be made known to the world, no matter how hard Pharaoh tried to resist. Conclusion. The story of the Nile turning to blood is not just a tale of a miraculous sign. It is a powerful testament to the hard heart of Pharaoh, who, despite witnessing the incredible power of God, refused to humble himself. The river that had been Egypt's lifeblood was now a symbol of divine judgment. Pharaoh's rejection would set in motion a series of events that would lead to the ultimate liberation of the Israelites. Yet it also serves as a stark warning. To oppose the will of God is to invite destruction. Pharaoh's pride and arrogance led to suffering, not just for him, but for all of Egypt.